VLOOKUP is used to look up data organized vertically in a table and return a corresponding value on the same row. Assuming we have a large dataset containing hundreds of rows of employee information, and our job requires frequently providing a few specific employee information. The current worksheet contains only 5 columns and 50 rows of records. Imagine you have 20 columns with 500 rows of employee information, and all you need is to find an employee's salary or department. It would take quite an effort to search through the worksheet to get the information. We can use VLOOKUP to easily retrieve relevant information from a large dataset. In order for VLOOKUP to work, the value we want to look up must appear in the first column of the worksheet. Let's say we want to look up the salary of an employee. There are two possible ways we can get the salary information. We can either look up the employee name or we can look up the employee ID. However, we may run into a problem using the employee name because we may have more than one employee with the same name. For example, we have at least 3 employees with the name Tom Maxwell. The best option would be to use the employee ID because the employee ID is unique to each employee. So when we're thinking of doing a VLOOKUP, we want to use a column or a value that is unique. Now that we have decided to look up the salary based on the employee ID, the employee ID column must appear at the first column on the left. So I'm going to select the employee ID, right click, cut, and we want to paste it right here. Insert cut cells. I'm just going to press escape. To make it easy selecting an employee ID, let's create a drop-down list containing all the employee IDs. I'm going to select the cell next to because we'll be filling in all the information right here. So I'm going to select this cell I1, click on data, data validation, and we want to select the option for list. Now it's going to ask us for the source, and we can click on this arrow. And we want all the employee IDs. So I'm just going to select the first cell, press Ctrl Shift and the down arrow to select all the employee IDs. And we can click right here. So now we have all our employee IDs. Click OK. We can see we have a drop-down list containing all of the employee IDs. Just going to select employee ID 1002. The first VLOOKUP we are creating is to find the corresponding name to our employee ID. We start by typing the VLOOKUP function, press tab. We are going to use the formula wizard to guide us through. Click on FX. The first parameter is the lookup value. Lookup value is the value to be found in the first column of the table. And for us, that's the employee ID. We already have that in the cell. So I'm going to select this cell. Then let's look at the next parameter. Table array is the full table range that contains the lookup value and the answer we want, which is the employee name. For this, we can select all the records in the table, but since employee name is in column B next to employee ID, the lookup value, we can simply select the cell range in column A and B. So for this, we're going to select the employee ID and the name, and we can just press Ctrl Shift down to select all the values. Column index number is the column number that contains the value we want. Each column has a number. The column count starts with number 1. So the first column is 1, the next one is 2, 3, and it goes on sequentially. Since we want the employee name, we type 2 because the second column contains the name of all employees. The last parameter is the range lookup. Range lookup accepts either a true or false argument. If we want Excel to find the closest match to our lookup value, in this case the employee ID, then we type true. If we want Excel to find an exact match to employee ID, we type false. Now, usually the argument we enter here would be false because we want an exact match to our lookup value. So I'm just going to type false. Now we have the corresponding name to employee ID 1002, which is Peter Young, and we see that here. And if we change the employee ID to another employee, ID 1006, we get the name of our employee. Change to another one, employee ID 1013, we get the name as well. Let's write another VLOOKUP to find the salary. This time we're going to type out the formula ourselves. The lookup value is the employee ID. Select that. We have comma. The table array contains both the employee ID as well as the value that we want to find, which is the salary. So this time we have to select all the range of the table. So we can't, although we don't need the job title and department, we can't, select the first two and then jump the next two, which is column C and D, and select E. We have to select all the table itself, the range of table. So Control Shift and press the down key, and that selects everything. Another way to select the range is if you look at the cell range, it's A1 to E51. A1 is the first cell, top left, and then if you look at the very last cell, this is E51, and that's why we have the range A1 to E51. So we have our comma. The next parameter is the index number. For the index number, we are looking for the salary. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 is where that's the column that contains the value we want Excel to return for us. We have our comma, and then the range lookup will be false. Now we can either type out false or we can type 0. So 1 is for true and 0 is for false. So if we just type 0, close our parenthesis, enter. And now we get the value of the salary for Irina Boyles. Now if we change to 1018, we get Tunde Adams and we get the corresponding salary.